Hi everyone, I'm David Aragona for this week's edition of the 2020 TimeformUS Road to the Derby series, where we're going to handicap the Louisiana Derby from Fairgrounds, going 1 3/16 over the dirt course there on Saturday. Still calling this a Kentucky Derby prep, even though the Kentucky Derby has been moved, as I'm sure all of you are aware, from May to September. Regardless of whether these horses actually make it to the Kentucky Derby, it's still a pretty lucrative prize for the 3-year-old, and it's drawn a really interesting field. And let's throw up that group of 16 runners that have been entered for this race. Obviously, 2 of them are on the also eligible list, so we'll go with the field of 14. And it's a pretty wide open race. You've got a lot of contenders. The favorite, Enforceable, is pretty lukewarm on the morning line. You've got horses coming out of 2 divisions of the Risen Star. We'll get to all of those. Before we get into the PPs, though, as we see the entire field here, I want to take a look at the TimeformUS pace projector for this race next, because it is a race, as you do often see in large fields, where the pace projector is predicting a fast pace. And the 2 horses that are likely to be vying for the early lead are the number 3, Wells Bayou, and the number 11, New York Traffic. No real surprises there, because Wells Bayou was the pace setter in the Southwest at Oaklawn Park most recently, and New York Traffic set the pace in one of the divisions of the Risen Star most recently. So these 2 horses do figure to be out towards the front end. Beyond them, though, while there aren't a ton of front runners among the other horses that are in this field, you do have a ton of horses who prefer to be placed close to the pace, like the number 14 Modernist, who is stalking the pace in one of those other divisions of the Risen Star that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So it does seem like there is potential for this pace to be on the quick side, and maybe that does end up benefiting a closer. Let's first talk about, among the contenders, the number 10 Enforceable, who is that morning line favorite. And Enforceable was second most recently in the first division of the Risen Star, getting these 2 races confused, as so many of these horses are coming out of both divisions of the Risen Star. He was in the first division of that race, one of just 2 horses in this Louisiana Derby field who are coming out of that specific race. Just him and Silver State are. I thought Enforceable ran pretty well to be second to Mr. Monomoy that day. His 107 TimeformUS speed figure was the highest that he's achieved so far. I thought Julien Leparoute, like he did in his prior start in the Lecomte, gave him another really good ride in the Risen Star last time. Enforceable just can be his own worst enemy sometimes coming out of the gate, because he tends to break a little bit slowly, often puts himself towards the back of the pack in the early going. He actually does have the speed to advance early in these races, and he did so on the backstretch last time. Just kind of puts himself out of contention in the early going due to those slow breaks. Again, in such a large field like this with 14 horses signed on, that could be an issue if he breaks slowly here. But just in terms of raw talent, I do think he's at the top of the heap. So if he works out a trip, he is the horse to beat in this race. Just don't want to accept a very short price on him, given the competitive nature of this race. Next, let's take a look at Modernist, the number 14 in here, who is the winner of one of those divisions of the Risen Star. He won the second division of that race at the Fairgrounds last time. And I think most people would consider this race that Modernist won to be the weaker division. The 105 TimeformUS speed figure that he got, a little bit lower than Enforceable got for his second place finish in the other division. And Modernist was just beating a weaker group of horses. The big major contender in that race, Anno D'Or, didn't show up for whatever reason. So Modernist was really just beating a lot of recent maiden and allowance winners. Not really a graded stakes quality field there, and I think the speed figure reflects that. And also, Modernist drew the inside post position last time, got an absolutely perfect trip, saving ground the entire way. Now he's drawn all the way on the outside in that post number 14, so he's not going to work out that same kind of favorable trip against a much better field. I just think last time's the time for Modernist, and he's a horse that you want to take a stand against in this race. And I actually prefer the horse that finished directly behind Modernist last time, that being Major Fed, who, unlike Modernist, drew the other end of the field. He's going to be breaking from down towards the inside in this race. And I think that's going to be good for a horse like Major Fed, who saving ground is always at a premium in races like this that feature a big field. The big question for Major Fed is, will he continue to get better with added ground? He handled the 1.125 distance last time in the Risen Star. Obviously, this Louisiana Derby is going a little bit farther at the 1 3/16. He was getting to Modernist a little bit last time, and perhaps he was slightly compromised by a wider trip that day. He was basically 3 to 4 wide around most of the turns, whereas some of the other horses that were successful in that division of the Risen Star saved a lot more ground. So I guess Major Fed can do better here, gets an interesting rider switch to Joao Rosario. I prefer some other horses, but he's one that I would definitely use underneath. A horse that I think you have to take very seriously in this race, who's coming in from a different direction, is the number 3 Wells was that horse projector. And let's take a look at Wells BAYOU's most recent race in the Southwest, where he finished second to Silver Prospector. This was a really good effort. He was sent hard to the lead from the gate. It seemed like a race that had other speed, signed on, but Wells BAYOU got to the lead, was fending off all challengers coming to the top of the stretch, just ends up getting run down late by Silver Prospector, who worked out an absolutely perfect trip to get the job done here. Now, Silver Prospector did come back in his next race and disappoint when he came back in the Rebel last weekend. That was run over a sloppy track, though. Silver Prospector maybe just didn't show up that day. I don't want to knock Wells BAYOU because of Silver Prospector not coming back to run well, because this Southwest did earn a really high TimeformUS speed figure when you compare it to some of the other Derby preps that have been run so far. Wells BAYOU got a 1:19 TimeformUS speed figure for this second place finish, and that is among the highest speed figures that we've seen among all of these 3-year-olds. Very few of them have broken that 1:20 threshold. So if Wells BAYOU repeats that kind of number here, he's going to be tough for this field to beat. It's just that was his first start on a fast track. I guess he's likely to encounter another fast track on Saturday at the fairgrounds. That's all good for him, but he's got to do it going a mile and 3/16. Distance, I think, could be a question for this horse. He is by looking at Lucky, who's a real stamina influence, but with so much other speed signed on, we're going to see how his stamina gets tested in this race. He's definitely a horse that I'm going to use prominently. He's not my top pick, but he's a horse that I would definitely put in the mix somewhere in exotics wagers. The number 4, Chestertown, is one that I think a lot of people might end up settling on in this race. He's 15-1 in the morning line, and I could see him getting bet down quite a bit off that price because it seems like a lot of people do like this horse and are optimistic about his chances, and I can't blame them because while he is making a stakes debut here, he did show plenty of potential in that optional claiming race that he competed in most recently on the Risen Star undercard. That race is also going a mile and an eighth, just like both divisions of the Risen Star, and Chestertown did not get the best of trips that day. You see all those TimeformUS pace figures in his PPs, color-coded blue. That indicates that the pace was slow. Obviously, that's going to compromise a closer like Chestertown. He was towards the back of the pack throughout most of the race, tried to advance at multiple points, but Ricardo Santana, who was on him that day, just had a lot of trouble finding a clear seam to run through. And even when they got into the stretch, he was just bottled up in traffic for almost the entire duration of the stretch drive. Finally got free in the last 16th of a mile, and he put in a good run to get pretty close to today's rival, Shake Some Action, just couldn't get to that horse late. Chestertown was best that day, but how does that compare to the field that he's likely to face in this Louisiana Derby on Saturday? I mean, it's a big step up in class for him. He's going to have to run significantly faster because previously he's had trouble even getting up into that triple-digit TimeformUS speed figure range. He's going to have to do it against a much better field. The distance may help him as a son of Tap, but I just think if he's going to get bet down up at 15-1 morning line price, I want to look somewhere else, and he's a horse that I would stick to using again underneath in exotics wagers. We've got some horses coming in from out of town who I think do need to be discussed. One of those would be the number 8 Royal Act, who's coming in from California. And I want to take a look at Royal Act's most recent start in the Robert B. Lewis when he was second to the previously undefeated 1,000 Words. Royal Act is all the way on the left of your screen here, coming widest off the far turn. And that was really what was most detrimental to his performance here because he was the horse who had to lose the most ground in this race, going wide both around the clubhouse turn and the far turn. But considering the ground walls, he actually stays on pretty gamely at the end of this race to almost get to 1,000 Words at the end. He, too, like Wells BAYOU, comes in from out of town, earned a pretty respectable speed figure in this race, a 1:14, which I think is the second highest number of anybody in this field. So if he repeats that kind of TimeformUS speed figure, he's going to be formidable here. The one question I have about Royal Act is that 1,000 Words came back to disappoint pretty badly in his next race in the San Felipe. So you have to question that the quality of that Robert B. Lewis just a little bit, because a lot of horses like Royal Act had stepped up to run new speed figure tops in that race, and you do want to see them be able to validate it. So I respect Royal Act. Again, he's a horse that I'll use because there are so many horses you can consider in this race. I just want to look to some others as my top selections. One of those that I do want to use a little bit higher up in my rankings is the number 9 Portos, and we'll take a look at his most recent start when he finished third in the Withers back in early February at Aqueduct. He loses to Max Player this day, who was coming off a maiden win. We have not seen Max Player since then, but there were some other horses of quality in this race, like Shotsky, who finished second. He was the Remsen winner. And Portos just does what Portos has been doing in most of his races. He's out of contention for most of the race, is running on best of all through the lane. He's getting to the leaders here in the late stages, going the mile and eighth distance. He's just a horse that seems like one that wants to run all day, kind of a plodding type, doesn't really have much of a turn of foot in him, but he's going to be finishing at the end of this race. And given that they're going the mile and 3/16 distance, I think that's really going to work in Portos's favor. And you see those two most recent TimeformUS speed figures that he's earned of 107. I mean, those stack up quite well against the horses that are coming out of both divisions of the Risen Star. So I think you do have to take this horse seriously. He's a decent price at 8-1 in the morning line. I think that's quite fair on him. So he's one of the horses that I would use pretty prominently in this race. My top pick, though, is one of the horses that is coming back, that is at the fairgrounds, one of those local horses that I haven't yet mentioned. That's the number 12, LYNN'S. He's a gigantic price at 30-1 on the morning line. I don't think we're going to get that kind of price on him because he has a little bit more appeal than that would suggest. But I do think LYNN'S is a horse that could get a little bit lost in the shuffle here, coming off 2 off-the-board finishes in his 2 most recent prep races. I just think LYNN'S is a horse that you can make some excuses for. Let's go all the way back to that race at the fairgrounds on December 21st. That day, he was beating Mr. Monomoy, who was the winner of one of the divisions of the Risen Star. And I thought he ran really well in that race back in December because those blue color-coded TimeformUS speed figures indicate that the pace was slow. He overcame that to get up to win. Perhaps he liked the sloppy track, but I think his next race in the mud at Oaklawn Park would suggest that it wasn't the wet track that moved him up. And I don't know why he didn't perform well in that Southwest, in that Smarty Jones 2-back. He was up close to a pace that mostly held together over a speed-favoring surface. He just dropped away, didn't seem to handle the conditions for whatever reason. I'm going to draw a line through that race because for me, that's the only poor race that he's ever really run. Some people might say that he ran poorly last time too in the Risen Star, but I think if you watch that race, he actually ran a lot better than it might seem to be 6th because Corey Lanerie made the decision coming out of the gate to take this horse all the way to the back of the pack, completely changing up the running style that he had used in his prior races. And I don't think that turned out to be the right move because that was a race, that second division of the Risen Star, that was totally dominated towards the front end by Modernist, Major Fed, New York Traffic. They were up close to the front throughout, and horses trying to close from way back, like LYNN'S, just seemed to be at a disadvantage. We saw another horse, Accession, come out of that race, who also got a similar trip. He returned and ran much better next time in the race that we saw last weekend at Oaklawn Park, the Rebel. So I think you might want horses who didn't show a lot of speed in those races coming back in their subsequent starts, and LYNN'S is definitely one of those. And if you watch the stretch drive of that Risen Star, he was passing horses really quickly at the end, weaving in and out to work around traffic, and he was finishing best of all across the wire. Just seemed like a horse that didn't get the chance to put forth his best effort that day. The progeny of the LYNN'S have really shown no distance limitations so far. Don't foresee him having trouble with the 1 3/16 distance. So I'm going to take a shot with LYNN'S, the number 12 in this Risen Star. He's my pick in this race. We'll see what price he is, but I do want to mostly focus on the 2 Mark Hasse runners, those being LYNN'S and the likely favorite Enforceable. I do think they are 2 of the most interesting horses. Enforceable, obviously the horse to beat. LYNN'S is the value play. And underneath, I'll use horses like Wells BAYOU, who's got that big speed figure, the number 9 PORTOS, and even that other out-of-town shipper, the number 8 Royal Act. So that's my take on the Louisiana Derby at the fairgrounds on the Saturday. Good luck to all of you playing the race.